Josephine Yam is the Executive Director of the Environmental Law Centre of Alberta. She's an international lawyer who is admitted to practice in New York as well as Canada, and also she practices in Ontario and the Philippines. Her legal specialization is focused on energy, environment, climate change, and carbon finance. And her presentation will provide a brief overview of the upcoming COP21 climate change conference in Paris and Canada's corresponding climate commitments to COP21. And she'll also provide some background on why the term decarbonization was recently added to the draft legal text of the Paris Climate Agreement and its implications for job growth in Canada. With that, I'll turn things over to you, Josephine. Thank you.
A very pleasant good evening. I'd like to thank John for that kind introduction and to Carla for inviting me to be part of this panel. First, to introduce the Environmental Law Centre of Alberta, because we're on the other side of the planet. The Environmental Law Centre of Alberta is one of the leading environmental organizations in Alberta, in which our mission is to educate and champion for strong environmental laws and rights so that all Albertans can enjoy clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment. Alberta, unfortunately, was subject to the detrimental effects of climate change. In June 2013, there was catastrophic flooding in and around Calgary. It was deemed the costliest disaster in Canadian history. There were 4 deaths and more than 100,000 people rendered homeless, more than $6 billion in losses, and more than $1.7 billion in insured losses. Additionally, in the 3 provinces of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, climate change has also affected these jurisdictions because of the drought caused by climate change and also the greenhouse gas emissions that were emitted because these forests were drying up, and so they were emitting more greenhouse gases than they were absorbing. So this became a problem as well in the 3 provinces. And so what is really happening? Our emissions are growing. Despite all best intentions, our emissions are growing at a very rapid rate. Interestingly, what are the Canadian opinions on climate change? About 81% believe that climate is changing and 13% deny that it is. The profile of climate deniers in Canada: Gen X, 18%, males, 17%, the mid-income group, 40,000 to 60,000, 18%, Atlantic Canada, 19%, Alberta, where I come from, 20%, conservative voters, 29%, the least educated, 17%, and then evangelical Christians, 32%. Still, some climate deniers in Canada, for sure. So I'm going to go very quickly over this outline. How did we get here with COP21? What are Canada's legal obligations before COP21, and what are Canada's obligations after COP21? How the world got here, as we know, and Roger mentioned, 1992 was the first climate change agreement. It was a very groundbreaking. 195 countries ratified it, including Canada, and it was the first global legal framework for addressing climate change. And then we had the 1997 Kyoto Protocol. It was a significant milestone in the evolution of international environmental law, with 191 countries, including Canada, ratifying it. And there was a principle under international law about common but differentiated differentiated responsibilities, where developed countries will have the legal obligation to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, but developing countries will not have the legal obligation. So this became a problem, because the developed countries were the only ones who had a legal obligation to reduce their greenhouse gases as being Annex 1 parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The U.S. said, you know what? China is actually growing and becoming one of the most powerful countries in the globe. Why should we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions when China is not considered a developed country and therefore is not obligated to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions? So the U.S. did not sign the Kyoto Protocol because China was not subject to the Kyoto Protocol. And because of this created a lot of anxiety because all of a sudden you only had one set of countries, the developed countries, who had that legal obligation to reduce their emissions. But because this was the problem and this was considered a failure of the Kyoto Protocol, 20 years later, we see that the US and China in September 2014 made a historic commitment to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions simultaneously with Barack Obama and President Xi Jinping making that commitment to grow the momentum of having the other countries follow suit in respect of making these legal obligations to reduce their climate emissions. And here, not only did we have what they call China and the US as the G2 countries, they're the only two countries that matter. In addition to that, we also had the leader of one of the biggest congregations in the world, Pope Francis, who said that mitigating climate change is also a moral obligation. So looking forward with COP21, which is going to happen in Paris, this is touted as the world's last best chance to reach an agreement on cutting greenhouse gas emissions. And the legal term for these countries' obligations is called Intended Nationally Determined Contributions, or INDCs. So countries who have set out their plans to set out their GHG reduction targets and how will they reach, it's really independent on the country that's delivering the INDC. Unlike in Kyoto Protocol, it was only developed countries that had a legal obligation. Here, through very, very persuasive strategies, there have already been 150 countries, both developed and developing countries, putting forward their GHG reduction targets. It's considered a successor to the Kyoto Protocol, so this is a very big deal. And however, there's still a lot of legal issues that are rolling around in terms of what is the legal form of the treaty? Are the GHG targets really binding? Which country should bear the most responsibility? How do we differentiate between developed and developing countries? And in the draft Paris Agreement, being a lawyer, looked over the 200 pages of the draft agreement, which was then reduced to 33 pages. It was interesting that there was a word that was very controversial and very provocative that actually got added to the draft agreement that is going to be discussed in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And that word is decarbonization. Why? Because the G7 countries, particularly the US team, said that this word is so crucial to send a strong signal to corporations, to banks, to markets, that fossil fuel intensive investments have high financial risks of being stranded assets. So what does it mean to decarbonize? To eliminate fossil fuels from the world's energy supply. So that's a very big undertaking, and of course becomes very controversial for countries that produce fossil fuels as well as countries that consume fossil fuels in a very big way. Canada's climate policy before Paris. As we all know, Canada signed a binding commitment in Kyoto to reduce its GHGs by 6%, below 1990 levels by 2012. In 2009, in the Copenhagen Accord, it made a non-binding commitment to reduce GHGs by 17% below 2005 levels. And then the shocker of it all was that the Harper government in 2011 made Canada withdraw from the Kyoto Protocol, because claiming that the Kyoto cost to Canadians would be about $14 billion or about $1,600 per family. And besides, China and US are not subject to the Kyoto Protocol, so why should Canada be subject to the Kyoto Protocol? And how did Canada avoid paying the penalty for not reaching its greenhouse gas emissions? So imagine here we're in University of Toronto, and let's say some students know that they're going to fail their physics class. So instead of taking the exam and getting an F, they just withdraw and just have a W on their transcript instead of an F. So that's exactly what Canada did, withdrew before the penalty hit Canada in terms of having to buy $14 billion of carbon credits in the global market. Because of that, the UN panel called Canada a climate laggard, and so much for our reputation that needs to be now refurbished. And so in May 2015, Canada submitted its INDC to the UNFCCC, and there's some criticism. The new target to be achieved that Canada put forward was 5 years later than the US target, and it is the weakest pledge among the G7 countries. Plus, it did not include regulations on oil sands, the fastest growing source of emissions. Also, there was no concrete plan to implement the target. Is it really doable? Canada produced 749 megatons in 2005 according to Environment Canada, but with 30% reduction, Canada will need to eliminate more than 200 megatons. So what does 200 megatons look like? It's removing all cars, trucks, motorcycles, buses, trains off the road for 1 year, which is only going to be 100 megatons. Shutting down the oil sands, which is only 62 megatons, or freezing the oil and gas sector, which is only 179 megatons. So one of the solutions they're putting forward is to buy international carbon credits in the global carbon market through the cap and trade scheme. So here we have carbon emissions in Canada. So you'll see here in 2014, the last bar, on the left here, you see that those are the current emissions of Canada for 2014. And you can see the Copenhagen target there in 2020. We're not even close to reaching the Copenhagen target of 2020. How much more the new target that was put forward by Canada in Paris, which is 30% below 2005 levels by 2030. So that's going to be really very tough for Canada. When look at our emissions in 2014, way up. We can't even meet Copenhagen. How can we meet Paris? So what is really happening? Is Canada really serious about reducing its greenhouse gas emissions? So its climate policy coming forward for COP21, it was noticed that if we really move and transition to a low carbon economy, clean energy actually provides more jobs than the oil sands. So the new Prime Minister Trudeau, in his platform, Real Change, the new plan for Canada's environment and economy, said creating clean jobs to grow the economy was one of his biggest pillars. By investing in a renewable energy economy, phasing out fossil fuel subsidies, and training Canadians to acquire skills for a clean economy via collaboration with universities and colleges. Also said the clean energy sector is almost 12 billion, and currently the clean energy sector directly employs 50,000 people in more than 800 firms. So it exceeds the direct employment in forestry, logging, and pharmaceuticals. The growth rate of job creation in the clean energy sector is actually 4 times the overall Canadian economy. So for example, and this is phenomenal, in 2012 to 2013, there were 9,000 jobs, but increased by 21% to 50,000 jobs because of the clean energy economy. It requires high skill, high wage, knowledge-based economy for Canada, and if it sustains its 8% annual growth, the clean energy economy will directly employ 100,000 people by 2022. One of the recommendations provided by analytical advisors was that we should really end the job versus environment debate. And why is that so? Because the clean tech sector does not mean we sacrifice economic growth to preserve the environment. Clean tech means generating economic growth via export-led clean tech products and services to protect the environment and achieve sustainable growth. In other words, it's really a false choice to choose jobs and the environment. And I think this is very, very crucial because and very important that the cost of action is definitely going to be very painful, especially in our province, because we're an oil and gas province. And it's going to be very painful and very costly and excruciating, but the cost of inaction is even greater. And I say this on a personal note because in my home country, the Philippines, my country was subjected to the strongest typhoon to ever hit planet Earth, ever recorded. There were 10,000 deaths, 11 million people were left homeless, and more than 2.86 billion in damages were incurred. And that's why the cost of inaction is even greater, not only for our jobs, but even for life here on Earth. And on that note, I'd like to end with a quote from President Barack Obama, who said in the United Nations Climate Change Summit in 2014, "We are the first generation to feel the impacts of climate change and the last generation that can do anything about it." Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josephine.